just talking about the international scene where these debates are playing out on taxation versus, what I would call and what you would call overspending. You mentioned the UK. I think you've also studied what's happening in places like Korea and Germany. Is there a trend happening here?
Well, I think there is a concern about trying to get back growth and dealing with inflation, because one way of trying to bring down inflation is to try to get the economy to supply more goods and services. And so what's happening is that some governments are looking at actually trying to improve the investment climate, because that's a way of trying to get more supply into the economy. Some governments are trying to give money back to individuals, and cutting taxes actually is probably one of the better ways of doing it, rather than just giving out demogrants, because that could also encourage work supply and savings. So we are seeing different responses, but I think what's happened is that there's been a real need for government to lessen the burden on the population rather than increasing it.
Right. Okay. Why isn't this happening more as a public policy debate in Canada right now, do you think?
Well, I think it's there. In fact, we already are starting to see provinces doing exactly that. Several of the provinces have been cutting their fuel excise taxes because of the higher energy prices. I think they are concerned about food inflation and other things. And so they're looking at providing some sort of relief to households, and they have been doing that. What hasn't really caught on yet is the need for more investment in Canada. Investment record has been actually quite poor in Canada since 2015. It's been very well noted that we've actually had one of the worst records amongst OECD countries since 2015 in terms of investment. There has been a pickup in investment lately, which is good news, but we have a long way to go. And I think we need to think a lot more in terms of what policies we can have that could encourage businesses to expand their production, and then that will, of course, help deal with inflation too.
Do you think that there's anything on the horizon that can increase that kind of investment? I note the recent rate hike from the Bank of Canada. Is that part of the equation, or is it going to take more public policy than just monetary policy?
Well, the rate hike actually is going to hurt investment, because investment really depends on two major factors. One is what businesses anticipate will be demanded in the future, and they're going to be worried about interest rate hikes causing demand to fall, and that will actually decrease investment. But also, a higher interest rate will increase the cost of capital, in that it's more expensive to borrow from the market, and that will also reduce investment. So you're really getting a double whammy when it comes to investment. But I think there are bigger issues that have played a role since 2015, and that's been especially our regulatory environment, which I think has particularly suppressed investment, and we especially see that in the energy sector, where the impact of Bill C-69 has been to really put a pale on investments in oil and gas and other energy sectors. And I think what people don't understand, it's also going to impact even clean energy projects down the road, to the extent that these things will be viewed upon as having an impact on whatever factors, because the legislation is so clumsy and the approach is so clumsy now that it really needs to be fixed.
Do you see more pressure then to develop our natural resources? I note obviously the recent trip by the Chancellor of Germany, and it did excite a little bit of debate about whether Canada is doing anything to resolve a heating and energy crisis in Europe.
Well, I think the sad part of it is that Canada's just not there. We have tremendous resources in terms of oil and gas, traditional energy, that is being sold right now. Over almost 95% of it goes to the United States, because we have very little access to other countries, although that will partly change when the TMX pipeline is finally completed. And we've had no LNG plants operating, and one will get completed in the next couple of years. But we basically have shut ourselves off from the international market outside the United States in terms of exporting oil and gas. But then even on clean energy like hydrogen and other things, those things are going to come from particularly the people that are involved in energy markets today in terms of their ability and scientific ability, technical ability. That's what we're going to have to leverage off, and we can actually make a very significant contribution to the rest of the world in terms of technologies and new products, whether it's carbon capture and sequestration and associated things like
Right.
that, hydrogen, et cetera.